Dr. Wiedenfeld here in the Pacific Ocean. And yeah, we're going to go up the coast here, a little geographical tour of areas that are probably the most important for cinema in this period since 1970. Um, Obviously, a lot was happening in the US uh, and Europe that we've talked about, and the global South. But as far as like what was, a place where really new and exciting things were happening, it's going to be all on the Pacific Rim here, and at least the west side of the Pacific Rim. So, okay, I'm going to start out in the Anglophone countries, and then move upwards. So, okay, let's go to Australia first, and there you have the emergence of, kind of an Australian new wave, it could be called, in the 70s, and state support is important. Again, the kind of subsidies that are usually tied into, either quotas or taxes on Hollywood film, on foreign films, and what the kinds of films that get supported are especially films for history. Good example here: Picnic at Hanging Rock, Peter Weir, film that really puts him on the map. These are, they're filmed on location, a certain kind of slower pace that fits in with auteur film, auteur tradition, and beautiful cinematography. So part of the worldwide success of these films is seeing Australia, seeing this new environment. But it's not simply the surface there. It's about the storytelling, the expression, the visual expression. In the film. So Australia kind of comes onto the scene, the world scene as a thing, as an Australian national cinema in the 70s and 80s. This movie is about, based on a true story about the disappearance of schoolgirls on a trip, I think. So there's an interesting mystery aspect to it. Okay, jumping into the more popular side of that emerged then from the kind of auteur basis. Let's get to Mad Max. You know, George Miller, who produces and he co-directs this film. He's a private company, so not here, not state support. In that sense, but there is going to be some state kind of incentives for international co-production. They want to bring big Hollywood production to Australia. This is a great example of it. So Mel Gibson, he stars in a lot of films from this era. Also, The Year of Living Dangerously, which is I think a Peter Weir film. But he really became known worldwide, first for Mad Max, and here he's starring with Tina Turner, who's like the biggest pop star of of the 80s, along with Madonna, at the same time as comparable to something like Beyonce in the early 2000s and 2010s. Tina Turner's huge. There's a great soundtrack with they had a hit song, "We Don't Need Another Hero," Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, 1985. And, George Miller's going to revive, in the 2010s, he's going to revive Mad Max again with Tom Hardy in the starring role. But, so the international co-productions and the, popular audience, especially Anglophone, is happening in the 80s. There's also Crocodile Dundee, which is a comedy starring Paul Hogan, Australian who ends up going to New York City. So there's Australia in the 80s. To the next level is that there are some very important studios, production studios, facilities that are built in Australia. Fox in particular, Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox, is kind of has global, but especially in the U.S. and the U.K. He's Australian. Moulin Rouge, Baz Luhrmann, who's Australian, Nicole Kidman. They filmed Moulin Rouge at the studios there in Australia. I think they're outside Sydney. Peter Jackson does something similar in New Zealand, which we're going to talk about next. I think it's around Wellington, building huge studio complexes that then, Hollywood and international films come to film there because they have tax incentives, so it becomes cheaper to film there than elsewhere. Moulin Rouge, Baz Luhrmann is known for his musicals, it's just over the top visual style and medley. I actually like his Romeo and Juliet from the '90s with Leo and Claire Danes. It's pretty interesting. Let's go to New Zealand now. Well, we're going halfway there because Jane Campion just burst onto the scene, especially with this film in particular, The Piano, as an auteur. Really, and telling women's stories in particular, the very lyrical style. This is so similar to the Australian trend, and she'll end up working in Australia, and does a co-production here with Australia and French production companies. So The Piano is a story of a woman who doesn't speak, and it's kind of like an arranged marriage, and she's, I want to say, from somewhere in the UK, and ends up with her daughter on the beach here in New Zealand. She plays the piano, but she doesn't speak, and it's about her relationship with this settler. So there's a colonial aspect to it. In this, it's historically set in the 1800s, maybe 1830s. Similar to the history trend in Australian cinema, it dovetails with that, but especially from the woman's perspective and all of the power dynamics of the kind of old time Victorian or pre-Victorian Anglophone Commonwealth world here. Known for its landscapes, but then also oscillating to really kind of close views, especially of the piano itself, and the kind of sensuality, so that that not speaking is bringing us even more into the visual and auditory aspects of the experience here. Okay, so Jane Campion deserves a couple words there. I already mentioned Peter Jackson as kind of the big co-production example from New Zealand, but another example of state support that happens on the heels of that in the 2000s, right away, Whale Rider became a huge hit. Another woman director, actually, but Maori. And so this is indigenous, stories about indigenous New Zealanders and young girl. I should also mention, who's become very popular in Hollywood is Taika Waititi, who's half Maori as well, coming out of New Zealand. Okay, so that's a too brief overview of cinema in Australia and New Zealand. Now let's go to Thailand and Taiwan. In these areas, Hollywood is dominant, big export force, but they're going to nevertheless support a film-going culture. They're going to build, help to fund the building of multiplexes so that people go to the movies. And so on the margins, there will be some, national cinema or filmmakers that come up. So probably the most important filmmaker out of Thailand is Apichatpong Weerasethakul, and there's a number of really important films that, especially successful at festivals, but the Tropical Malady here is a great one. His style is fascinating. It's about storytelling, and it has these kind of magical elements of traditional storytelling that then happen in cinema, and it's unclear what exactly we're supposed to make of it, because there's both this realist aspect of bringing us into the everyday, which he does, through long takes, landscapes, and I don't know if it's the long take or just this kind of contemplative, almost slow cinema at times. But then there's these mysterious or mystical moments within that everyday world of people telling stories and living their own lives. And there's a real innocence. It's not that kind of scary mystery. It's wrapped in with this kind of innocent approach to the everyday. Multiple stories from multiple people. Not following the traditional, three-part structure. Yeah, you got to check out Apichatpong. Taiwan. Bigger cinema in Taiwan have a kind of a new wave in the 1980s. The most important figures are Edward Yang here and Hou Hsiao-hsien. There was popular filmmaking that was kind of making the same sort of martial arts and comedy movies that were coming out of Hong Kong in the 70s. But then something happens different in the Taiwan in the 80s, and that's these filmmakers known for minimal dialogue. The urban settings here with Edward Yang, and kind of the Taiwan is emerging as a an economic force tied in with new technology. There's big chip manufacturers that are happening here, and and there's a finance. There's a whole growing cities, and Taipei in particular, and the kind of urban life of the young urban professionals that Edward Yang is capturing. And in this 2000 film Yi Yi, it's a little bit older. They have children, and we're getting different aspects of family drama here. The vision of the young boy is the photography of the film, and this kind of outsider childhood look is fascinating. So don't have I'm going to skip over the Philippines for the sake of time and talk about we're going to move to those other areas next, to Japan and Hong Kong. First, Japan. I'm actually going to do them separately. So Japan, remember it burst on the world scene in the 50s. It had a very strong national cinema with domestic audience that had been around since the teens. 50s, it hits the international market. Well, one of the consequences is that Hollywood and foreign films really start to pour in the 70s and 80s, and at the same time video cassettes arrive, and so less people are going to the theaters. So for those two reasons, there's a bit of a decline in Japanese cinema, but there's a revival based the popular genres of yakuza, kind of crime films, gangster films, martial arts, and science fiction. A lot of these combine in the specific animated style of anime, which coming out of a Japanese culture of comic books, but shortly, but for adults. And one thing that anime is known for, the for adults aspect, is that there's violence and more sex than animated movies in North America, which are generally thought of as something for kids. So there's an artistic aspect here, robots, superheroes, kind of the franchise model. A lot of those, these are the general trends of the business that are happening in Hollywood. You can see it in anime as well, and it has to do on one level with the production is not given a lot of freedom to the auteur. These are bigger. I don't know if it's just because it's a bigger budget, but it's arranged around what's called a film committee, and I think you can see it on the Akira committee is has the copyright there on Otomo's film here. And the committee is a committee of some artists, but a lot of business people who are thinking about marketing, and so there's they're looking at these elements of like sex and violence and cars and superheroes and franchises, and these are things that sell well, and that's part of the character. It sounds like I'm taking away from the artistic aspect of Akira here because I'm just talking about the business side, but it's just an important background there. And anime also, part of its style is that it's done faster than like the traditional Disney cell animation, which is focused on movement. Here we're a little more Soviet style, fast cutting, and sound is important. The exception to that would be Miyazaki, who is not working for a bigger studio with this committee, but has a small company and is continuing this more artisanal style. So he's not making a lot of franchises, but more like an auteur, only coming out with films every couple of years, sort of the classic Disney pace, but in very Japanese traditions and culture that in his own way that he's working with. And instead of sex and violence, it's much more about spirit and nature. So you can see how within the animation market, why Miyazaki would be so successful internationally with a target audience of children, but also, as a Japanese auteur, is a standout as well. Does auteur fit for animation? Maybe not, because the auteur was a term that we used, for the idea of the camera pen. Well, here it's not like he's using a camera. Miyazaki is like an artist, or at least looking over a team of artists. So he's directly just an artist here, rather than an auteur, which is kind of a behind the scenes artist. So Studio Ghibli and My Neighbor Totoro is a really important film here. I need to move on to another important auteur who made a big two successes on the international scene in 2021 with Drive My Car, which won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film, and for Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, which I actually like better. Maybe it's because it's shorter and it's three separate stories. But the way that they go together is fascinating, and it won at Venice. Ryosuke Hamaguchi, very theatrical, but there's these elements of the uncanny within the everyday. A lot of dialogue, which is generally hard for foreign movies to find an international audience if they're dialogue heavy, because people subtitles are hard. The visual, we talked about the Australian, landscape photography, those tend to be more immediately accessible to an international audience than dialogue and drama. But I don't know. For me, Hamaguchi does it. Even though I'm reading the subtitles, there is just something to the drama and the way that he films it that is really captivating. So that's Japan. Now to jump to Hong Kong. Well, one thing I want to say in comparison to Hollywood is that, Hong Kong was making popular movies since the 50s. And they were exporting to all around, all of this Asian Pacific here. And so some of the countries like Philippines, Taiwan, and Thailand that we were talking about, before Hollywood moved in and people were watching Hollywood movies, they were watching Hong Kong movies first. So that's important to think about. So Hong Kong is kind of a little Hollywood, or just a significant regional player here. The Shaw Brothers, and I have a picture of their studio, Movie Town Studios, from they had in place in 1958. Especially known for martial arts. The 70s is the Kung Fu movies. And, before we get to, I want to mention Touch of Zen here in particular. So King Hu, he number of people, works at Shaw Brothers and then leaves to kind of found his own studio. And Touch of Zen is really well known. What made it so well known in the 21st century is that Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was like a major martial arts and artsy martial arts movie from 2000, it references or mimics some of the techniques of A Touch of Zen in this like bamboo forest, the special effects of people kind of defying gravity. It also, the Matrix picks up on this as well. But the Kung Fu craze itself, the biggest figure is Bruce Lee. And the Bruce Lee movies, The Big Boss is, I think, the first big one. And, Bruce Lee's Hong Kong, I think he was born in Hong Kong and then grew up in the U.S. or moved to the U.S. And had some kind of minor roles in Hollywood. Very white-focused Hollywood at the time is not going to give him a major role, but he goes to Hong Kong, Kung Fu movies, and he becomes a huge world star, kind of a representation of Asian culture, Asian identity everywhere. So these are international, I think they're international, no, this one's not an international co-productions, but his later ones are. Golden Harvest is a company. It's with Raymond Chow, looking at the poster there, who's another figure who had been a director and worked at the Shaw Brothers and then started Golden Harvest on his own. So Bruce Lee, who then has a number of 3 films and then co-production on Enter the Dragon. I think he dies tragically and somewhat mysteriously right before the Enter the Dragon is released. But this, the action star from Hong Kong is taken up. The mantle is taken up by Jackie Chan in the 80s. He's a different kind of star. He's more comedic, kind of everyman than Bruce Lee, but famously does his own stunts. So we just wanted to mention Jackie Chan there. So they're working in genre films, but important kind of artistic leveling up from pure entertainment with Better Tomorrow. It's a great example from 1986. Stars Chow Yun-fat, who becomes an international star, and he's in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, for instance. John Woo, directs, and he will go to Hollywood and direct a number of films, um, action films, and there's something of the anti-hero type, that we saw in Breathless, that which actually goes back to like the Hollywood gangsters. And but anyway, you can see here he's a bit of a bad boy, but he's romantic at the same time. And one thing to say about what I mean by glitzy genre films is that there's a sophistication to technique here that is a nice parallel to what's happening in Hollywood itself. Like Hollywood blockbusters in the 80s are known for the sophisticated technique, and how everything looks is it just very professional and stands apart from the normal filmmaking. And that, like in France, we had the cinéma du look, which had this kind of glitzy aspect, but for more artsy films. Here, it's genre films. Tsui Hark, also another really important producer from Hong Kong, and Shaw Brothers, and the kind of the operatic, the Peking opera informs the kind of balletic aspect of Tsui Hark's films as well. One auteur I want to mention is all-time great Wong Kar-wai, and this is a still from In the Mood for Love, and which is I've seen it dozens of times, and it's so fascinating, both the story of this kind of unrequited love, but then also, well, not unrequited love, but this the kind of barrier between being in the mood for love, but not being able to publicly be in love. What that's about, just being in the mood for love rather than actually being in a relationship. And the production design and cinematography and everything in this movie are worth poring over. Last thing I'll say about Hong Kong is that, so it had been kind of a British protectorate, and that's why it is so engaged with commerce here in the 50s and 60s, while mainland China is going to be enclosed under Mao and the Cultural Revolution. Well, that's going to change in 1997 when Britain is going to give up the protectorate status, and it's going to transition. Hong Kong will transition back into being part, or it's losing some of its special status that it once had, and becoming more governed by mainland China. And so that's going to cause a decline in Hong Kong cinema, and focus back to mainland China. Okay, we are at the mainland China and South Korea. I'm going to go to South Korea first. If Hong Kong was the place from the 70s to 2000, maybe declining in the 90s, it's South Korea and China that are on the rise in the 90s and at the pinnacle in the 2000s. Number of auteurs. Kim Ki-duk, kind of infamous, works with some provocative subject matter, especially success, in festivals, as auteurs do. This film, terrible American title, Three Iron, which is, if you watch the movie, it's stupid. The French title is better. It's The Tenants, and it's about this. Well, first, this guy who, when people are on vacation, he breaks into their houses and lives there, but like, he cleans the houses, and so when they get back from their vacation, things are cleaner and more orderly than it had been when they left. It's very, there's an interesting kind of strangeness here, and what's going on in the background, on the double life that he's leaving, kind of jumping into and living somebody else's life, which is kind of like what we do as we're watching movies. So yeah, I love this. I love this film. Um, and another thing I want to say, just in general about the success of Korean cinema is not so much there's state support, I think, just for culture in general on a big level. K-pop is also coming out of it in popular music and is successful internationally. But as a national culture, Korea wants to be on the map, and as it finds economic success, it's pushing for cultural products that are Korean and standing out as Korean. Probably the most successful film, and auteur who's working in popular genres is Bong Joon-ho. Park Chan-wook also working in kind of the horror mystery genre. Bong Joon-ho has The Host. It's a monster movie. And a great allegory. It's a very clever satire. There's an intellectual side to his films that make what seems like pure entertainment actually quite interesting. And there's a comedic side. This is great. I mean, South Korean comedy is hilarious. Maybe not seen so much, so popular as kind of the horror and mystery stuff, but. What I love about Bong Joon-ho is the satire, is the comedy. And Parasite, famously won all the awards, and it's. I assume you've seen it, because it's a great film. Nothing needs to be said about it. Okay, so that's Korea. Let's jump to China here. And so I talked about how I mentioned before that it was kind of closed during the Maoist era. They produced a lot of musicals in a certain genre. Well, we mentioned it before, but this changes under Deng Xiaoping, and I think after 1976. So you see here the Beijing Film Academy reopens in 1978, and there's just the kind of the way they talk about generations since the founding of Democratic Republic of China. It's called the fifth generation, who's the first generation of directors to come through Beijing Academy when it reopens. Great example is Yellow Earth, directed by Chen Kaige. And the cinematographer Zhang Yimou is will later become, along with Kaige, the two giants of Chinese cinema. They're working in kind of medium budget here. There's very artistic films, but they're also geared toward a popular audience. Yellow Earth is beautiful. If you can get a good copy to see the landscape shots, it's set in rural China in 1939. So, we have a communist soldier who's going to recruit people to the war during World War II. So this historical setting, focused on the woman character, and this kind of tension between the modernizing impulse that is going to be represented here by the communist soldier who comes in. So I mentioned Zhang Yimou. Here's Hero, which may be kind of the breakthrough from moving out of more artistic dramas to big budget action, spectacular, trying to compete with Hollywood, doing some co-productions with Hollywood, and at least at this time they are. And that's Hero here with Jet Li, action martial arts star. And this is following the success of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, sort of revived, the big martial arts movie. This is more action here in Hero, and also focused on national stories. It's set in it's a story from Chinese history. And this is, like I mentioned, Korea trying to promote Korean culture. China's trying to do the same thing, especially for the diaspora community. So there's co-production with the U.S., but then, after 2002, China will sort of take the upper hand in the relationship with Hollywood, and it's very varying quotas on how many Hollywood films are let in, and the kind of investment that Americans bring in is then Chinese investment is just as big, and there's as much wealth in China by the first decade of the 21st century. Now, it's not only big budgets, there's also artistic, kind of indie-like filmmaking that's happening in China. Sixth generation, it emerges in the 90s. Xi Zhangke, one of the most important figures here, and his films, they don't always pass the censors. They're not necessarily shown in China. He's going to be on the festival scene like a lot of filmmakers in this situation. But so his style is, it's a documentary realism, some of the neo-realist tradition, long takes, doing some work in video as well, and this film, The World, is it's looking at some of just the weird paradoxes of China. It's kind of it's communist country, but it's in it's moving into the market economy in the 80s, which creates all these strange kind of contradictions. Here in outside Beijing, there's a theme park that has all of these world sites, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Here it has an Eiffel Tower. So what does it mean to rather than being a tourist that's going to the Europe and North America to visit these sites, to go see the simulation of it at this theme park? Isn't that the kind of the same thing? And simulation and its relationship to the life and environment around us, and as well as what that means, what cinema's role is in that great movie, The World. Okay, last thing I want to mention is about the studios in Qingdao. Wanda Studios, largest facilities in the world. So these are the biggest studios, bigger than anything in Hollywood or Australia or anywhere. There's some fluctuations in finances. I don't know if you could say it's the most productive at this point, but it gives you an idea. It's a great symbol for how China is the biggest market now for cinema and making some of the biggest films. It's clearly a rival with Hollywood, and there's an interesting thing there about what it means to have to be if you're kind of into politics and being a great power and kind of on the world stage. Isn't it interesting that cinema is so important for that? This was even true for France, who's world power in 1895 when cinema emerged. Cinema is always tied in with industry and something about kind of global culture that cinema is very important for. So part of the reason that China became such a large market, there was investment from the U.S., but it was kind of controlled and regulated by the Chinese state. They had an idea of wanting to build up cinema, and for various reasons. So that's a brief overview here of the West Pacific and all the cinemas, which is the key most interesting things happening in cinema since the 70s are really in this zone.